Wonderful. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the interview. I'll let you just introduce yourself quickly. I'll introduce myself to you, start on a little level of cordiality, and then I'll go straight into it, okay? So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Dylan, thanks so much for having me. I'm Mark Gudgel. I'm a candidate for mayor in Omaha, Nebraska. I don't know how many of your listeners are locals here to Omaha, but it's a great city. We're actually on I-80, the largest city between Denver and Chicago. It's a substantial urban area. Our metro area is more than 1 million, but our city core is larger than Minneapolis. But I don't think it's thought of that way because it's so poorly run. And frankly, the city's careening towards a cliff. I've got kids, and some friends and I had a conversation, decided it was time to take the wheel and see if we could correct things. So here we are.
I'm happy to have you on. My name's Dylan. I work in Maryland politics. I'm a foreign policy advisor. I am currently a financial director for 2022 campaign, and I work in a lot of I'm on my local city environmental board. So I work in politics. I do streaming online. I've done some union organizing stuff, and I'm happy to interview you.
Cool. Thank you.
Wonderful. So the first issue I wanted to ask you about is just a very simple one. What's your favorite book on the giant ass bookcase behind you?
It's funny. I teach at a university sometimes, and I was teaching a Zoom class last summer, and I got up and grabbed a book off my shelf, and my class starts laughing. And I got back. I said, "What?" They said, "Oh, we thought that was a Zoom background." um, I think one of the most important books that I've read in a very long time is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi.
Hmm.
It's not actually on the shelf; it's downstairs. But and I think that's really, it's influenced the way that I think a great deal. A lot of the books on the shelf behind me have to do with 20th century genocide, which is my field of study in academia. And, to that end, Night is, I think, an extraordinarily powerful book that always holds a dear place in my heart. I knew Elie Wiesel fairly well before he passed. Um, and then there's also I'm Not Leaving on the shelf behind me, which is about Carl Wilkins. Carl Wilkins was the only American to remain in Rwanda in 1994 when the genocide broke out. And he worked with the Gasimba brothers at the Gasimba orphanage, and together they saved hundreds of people. And so there's some inspirational literature on the shelf behind me.
I saw that you were followed by the Armenian. I forget. The AN. I forget the exact abbreviation, and I was so curious as to why you were followed by the group. Do you have any connections with them?
Certainly, I've for many years I've taken my students to visit the offices of the Armenian National Committee of America when we are in Washington D.C. And I'm a passionate advocate for the acknowledging of the Armenian genocide, which we have made some strides toward, and for teaching about it, and also for reparations for the Armenian people.
Hmm. Now I have to ask you my personal thing because this is my big issue. I'm huge on Kurdish issues. The creation of a Kurdish state, the stopping what Turkey is doing currently in Syria with the militias, of course, committing the brutal war crimes they are, supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces. What is your stance on general Kurdish issues within Iraq and Syria? And Iran. And Iran.
Right. So for years I worked for the National World War I Museum, um, and I helped establish a teacher fellowship program there. And I think that it's imperative that we understand, right, what we refer to today as the Middle East, which is this really like kind of ethereal, difficult to wrap your head around thing. Um, right, used to be one country, the Ottoman Empire, and I think that when that dissolved, right, it's I look at it very much the way I look at colonization and decolonization. I would say that the powers at play have a tremendous obligation to ensure the safety and the livelihoods of the people who live there. And I suppose to get a little more specific on that issue, um, anything that Erdogan is doing should be considered suspect at all times.
Yes.
Um, so
Wonderful. I'm happy we're all on the same page. I just wanted to ask you that because not a lot of working in local politics, I don't find a lot of people who are interested that much in foreign affairs. It's more just like county, like budgetary issues and stuff like that. But I will. It is a
Yeah,
mayoral race, and you're not the you're not going to be the next ambassador to Iraq. So I gotta bring us back to local issues. So I'm on my local city environmental board, and the biggest issue for me on environmental issues is the degradation of green space and the eventual loss of green space due to expansion of industry, expansion of housing, and businesses tearing down green space and not replacing it within city limits in my city. So I wanted to ask, are you going to make not only preserving green space, but possibly restoring green space a priority during your if you were elected in office?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I mean it's such an important thing, and I'm glad that you and I'm certain many others, acknowledge that and feel that way. The most substantial thing I think when you fly into New York City, regardless of the airport, the one thing that you can't help but notice, right, is the park. And as you're looking down on the city, there is this massive preserved rectangle of green space, and it is the only reason that people can live on that island anymore. And ultimately, if we don't protect those things, right, then they go away. And it's so easy to say, well, but we really need a house here, it's worth so much money, we have to sell it off. Roosevelt was a horrible. There were multiple Roosevelts. Theodore Roosevelt was a horrifying racist and a scallywag by every definition. The thing he got right was national parks. And ultimately, as the city of Omaha is concerned, there's a lot of debate about our green space, but we own a lot of land. And beautifying that land, planting that land, having more trees, is part of our sustainability plan, but it's also just part of having a more livable city for our residents.
Do you have any specific policies or anything you would implement to preserve or expand current green space?
We've written quite a bit of policy at this point, and we have not written anything specific to green space. Outside of perhaps, I think it's probably encompassed to a minor extent in what we call Omaha 2045, which is our commitment to make Omaha carbon neutral by 2045. That will kind of by definition require more green space. But I've been eyeballing some of the things. I think is it Paris? Somebody just surrounded their city in a forest.
Mm-hmm.
Just planted it. And where I'm from here in Nebraska, I'm from a small town out west originally, and it's the largest hand planted forest in the world, or at least it was when I worked there, the Nebraska National Forest. And so we've seen it done. We know it can be done. But it's kind of ridiculous to think of Nebraska as the home of Arbor Day if you're not actively working to preserve trees and green space.
Of course, of course. So, one second, I gotta pull this up.
Okay.
So, when it comes to Nebraska, and a big issue for me has always been LGBT issues, LGBTQ plus issues. It was very hard for me when I was getting up to accept who I was and get adjusted to who I was. And a big part for me was an interaction with my mayor, who actually was the first gay mayor of the city, and I eventually became his campaign manager and helped him win re-election. And that was a huge moment for me of getting accepted in my city and being able to adjust to who I was. With the Trump presidency, who has targeted adoption, gay adoption rights, who has, of course, done the trans military ban, and there was, of course, also local level issues that have been popping up across the United States. What will you do to make sure that people in your city who are LGBT feel safe, feel welcome, in a state that has a long history of anti-LGBT hate crimes and legislation?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the perfect question for anybody running for mayor of this city. And actually, I hope so. And I'll share some information like in the chat later. But I hope that people will check out our webpage and learn more about the campaign and give me money. But it's on Fridays we roll out policy, and it comes in the form of a podcast and a newsletter. And I think one of the best podcasts we've ever recorded is the one we're releasing this Friday about a policy that I'm calling the LGBTQ plus Bill of Rights. And you have to acknowledge, as in a position like mine, that the chief executive of a municipality has some power and has some limitations on their power. And what we've sought to do with this is to guarantee that Omaha will be a safe haven regardless of what Nebraska and the country look like. And we did that for several reasons. One, I think that the makeup of the Supreme Court is substantially different than it was 2 years ago, right? I know that it is. And so I don't know that people's protections, even at the highest levels, are safe. Our state, unfortunately, is governed by someone whose position toward the LGBTQ plus community, I think, could only be described as aggressive.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. But I'm not running for governor. So the question I always have is, okay, what can we do about it? And so as a municipality, we're going to seek to put in place a tremendous number of protections. And it starts with the bully pulpit. It starts with someone like me in the office who will have the conversations that normalize, just the acceptance of our fellow human beings, regardless of who they are. But we can do more with legislation. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. There's a bill on the floor of the unicameral right now that would ban conversion therapy in Nebraska. I would say it is likely that even if that bill passes through our relatively conservative unicameral, it will be vetoed by the governor. But we can ban conversion therapy within the city limits of Omaha and create a safe haven. There's another bill proposed by my senator, Senator John Kavanaugh, which will end the gay panic defense, which, I mean, what a stupid thing anyway, but right. And if anybody who's listening maybe isn't familiar, it's a defense that has unfortunately held up in some courts of law in which someone has been violent, even murdered another person, committed homicide, and said, well, it's because I found out he was gay and it surprised me so much, or whatever. And that has actually worked, which I could just start ranting in expletives right now about that, but we don't have to allow it in our municipality.
One moment. For anybody in chat who doesn't know what this is, Riley Grace Rochong, a trans streamer on the platform, who also works in Maryland politics, currently doing stuff in the General Assembly. I was able to help them get an article published in Maryland Matters in favor of current legislation to help get rid of that defense in Maryland. So if you want to learn more about that, you can actually go to her YouTube channel. And you should also, if you're in my state, Maryland, support the legislation to the Maryland legislature as well. You can continue. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for doing that. That's great. But there's more that we can do, right? The city's a large employer, so that we can require, or we can ensure that our employees, in particular our trans employees, have healthcare benefits that are appropriate for them. We can require anybody we contract with as a municipality of 500,000 people to have anti-discrimination policies in place. And there's an awful lot more. And ultimately it's all laid out in the policy. And I hope people will listen to the podcast again. I think we have a pretty good podcast, but I think this is one of the best we've ever done.
So I wanted to ask you a question, because this a lot of times, and I talk to people and they get a little flaky on this, and I wanted to see what you would say on this one. Do you consider conversion therapy a form of emotional and sometimes physical torture?
I would consider it a hate crime. And so I suppose the response is yes. There's no flakiness about it at all. That, at least from my standpoint, it's just, to call it inappropriate is to downplay what it is. Mm-hmm. It's a horrific thing. I cannot imagine subjecting another person to that torture. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, 100%. Happy to have that endorsement from you. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to ask you about, specifically about undocumented peoples in the United States. So I wanted to ask you, what legislation are you going to put forward, or if none, then you can explain that as well, to protect undocumented people in the state of, in your city, since, again, in the state of Nebraska, much like the laws I was talking about earlier with gay people, they have been quite aggressive towards undocumented people in the state.
Absolutely. In a recent example in our state, our governor actually sought to ensure that undocumented people would not be able to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. He's actually since extended that to, teachers and other people, but that's a separate issue. I think that there's a lot that can be done to protect undocumented immigrants. It starts perhaps, for anybody who's digging into me a little bit, with a policy we called Our Omaha. We'll rename it when I'm in office. I later found out somebody's using that, but for something else. But it's modeled after My City, which is a program in Nashville, and it's about supporting our immigrant and refugee populations. Many of whom are documented, of course, but some of whom are not, and helping to create a pathway to citizenship. um, and doing things that would be part of that policy is just helping people pay for that obnoxiously expensive, cost prohibitive test to become a citizen. But ultimately, I think that there are all kinds of things we can do in reforms to the way that we police. What are you pulling people over and what are you asking them for? Like, why do I need your ID right now? What were you doing is a reasonable question. Ultimately, though, these are populations of people who are near to my heart and who need to be defended, and who will find an advocate in me should I become the mayor of Omaha.
I would like to ask you, on the policies we talked about so far, I want to continue. What are the differences between the policies you've just talked about and the person you are currently running against who have different policies on these matters?
Sure. I would quip a little bit and say the difference is that my policies exist. We currently, if you're thinking of the incumbent as my opponent, and I should mention, I mean, there are 8 people in this race right now.
Yes.
So it's a deep field.
But yeah, I was referring to the incumbent, though.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, and that's, then my response is pretty appropriate, because our incumbent really, I mean, there's nothing coming out of City Hall to suggest that we can think much past tomorrow in this city. We're constantly getting caught off guard. There's no vision for the future. And you can look at all kinds of examples to illustrate that point. But in regard to the policies you and I have talked about, let's just take the LGBTQ plus Bill of Rights for a moment. Our incumbent mayor, as a member and I believe the president of the city council, twice voted against protections for the LGBTQ plus community in Omaha in the employment in the marketplace. The vote lost, but that doesn't change the fact that that's who this person is. She is an enemy to the LGBTQ plus community, and my friends in the community, who are numerous, are well aware of that. And so that comes up a lot. But we're also we're useless as a municipality to our immigrants and refugees. We do nothing to help them. My policies on public transportation make me look revolutionary in contrast with the
That's the next topic.
Okay, which with her non-existent policies on public transportation. So maybe that's a good segue. But I would say that the incumbent and I are diametrically opposed foes.
Okay. So I am not a car owner. I am somebody who lives near DC, and so takes the metro everywhere and buses everywhere. And I have found that I would like, in my city and generally across the United States, public transportation to be more accustomed to the public. We need to start thinking about transporting people instead of cars, as that should be the primary goal. Do you line up with that type of vision, and what type of policies would you put in place to improve public transportation in Omaha?
Yeah, 110%. And I could talk to you for an hour about public transit in Omaha and my vision for it, but I'll try to boil it down to its finest. Our municipal budget is $1.3 billion. That does not include any money for Metro, the Metro Area Transit, which is becoming a regional transit authority, which will change things up and make it kind of interesting. But their budget, Metro's budget, and we run exclusively buses right now. So like your Metro, I worked at the Holocaust Museum in DC for 6 years.
My girlfriend worked at the Holocaust Museum.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Is there a chance we knew each other?
Kaya.
Last name?
Patterson.
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't believe it's a big place, but anyway, that would have been amazing. So I worked in the education department for 6 years and love your public transit. We can't have that here for a lot of reasons. But what we can have is a system of buses that accomplishes the same thing. When I say we can't have that, what I mean is that digging up the roads and putting in a subway system isn't in our budget. But we can run high efficiency buses. And in fact, part of my plan is transitioning to electric buses from our current diesel fleet for the environment, among other reasons. But we can run enough buses to keep people where they're going quickly and efficiently. We can also do a lot to improve walkability and bikeability in this city. And we know that people use those services when they're available, but not when they're deterred from using them as we currently do.
Here's a specific question about bikes. My city government has done everything possible to encourage its use. At least the mayor has. But there's this kind of idea around bikes, that bikes are starting to hoard the road and they're getting out of the way and the roads are for cars. And that has affected the ability to put in proper protections for people who are using bikes and have resulted in sometimes fatalities or extreme injuries. What specifically, not only are you going to do to increase the options available for people who want to take these alternatives like bikes, but make sure that it's safe when comparing it to the tragedies that have occurred due to that lack of safety measures?
Sure. Right now, our bike lanes in Omaha are really willy-nilly in terms of where they are and where they go. But I think very noteworthy is that none of them are protected. I don't believe there's a protected bike lane in the city. And so if you drive down the street closest to me that has a bike lane on it, which is about 5 blocks away, by the way, you'll find that there's the road, and then there is the bike lane, and then there's the car parking. Well, every car has a driver.
Mm-hmm.
So if the driver's side door opens into the bike lane, you've already screwed up, right? Many cars don't have passengers, unfortunately. So even just switching the location of those actually improves the bike lane. But if we were talking about New York City earlier, and I don't aspire to make Omaha, New York, but I take students there about once a year. I did before the pandemic. And it's amazing. They'll be looking at these bike lanes and bikes whizzing around, in Times Square. But the bike lanes are protected, and so it works. So I think that there's a lot that we can do there. And I also want to see fewer cars on the road. I don't want to take away your car, but I want to make sure that you don't have to have one. I want to make Omaha a city in which you don't have to have a car. You can if you want to.
Okay. So, as a younger person involved in politics, it's really important to me to have other young people get involved in politics. But there's a lot of barriers in place in a lot of cities to not only educating young people in local schools about why they should get involved in politics, teaching them how it works, or just allowing them to get on city boards or run for office. What would you do to make it easier and encourage young people to get involved in politics so they can make change in Omaha?
Sure. I think the most important thing that I have to offer from City Hall as it relates to young people and getting them involved in politics is genuine respect. Frequently, my students I know who consider running or even just volunteering time with campaigns, feel disrespected, overlooked, right? And frankly, they are. My gosh, I'm a classroom teacher. I can't tell you how many times people will begin conversations with me with phrases like kids these days. And I'm like, look, if that phrase comes out of your mouth, I can tell you two things. Number one, you're old. And number two, you're out of touch. Because kids these days are whatever they want to be. And young people are incredible. And having somebody in City Hall who has spent, I've spent 17 years teaching young people and learning alongside them and being a public servant. I respect young people. And so I think that opens a lot of doors. There's no reason, as far as I'm concerned, that young people can't serve in my cabinet. I have a number of very young people on my staff as a candidate for mayor. And I think it's important to have those voices not only present at the table, but actually amplified. And I think that it requires somebody who feels the way I do to make that happen.
Would you ever consider starting partnerships with local schools to actually teach young people in those educational institutions about local government? Start bringing maybe city council members to the schools, or people on city boards, or maybe even public workers to the school to teach them about local government, to get them more involved. Maybe do voter registration drives.
Absolutely, to all of it. I joked the other day, except it's not really a joke. I've been a teacher for 17 years. I have never seen, and in multiple districts, by the way, and I have never seen a school board member in a public school.
Mm-hmm.
That is a problem. When I'm mayor,
Quick diversion. Teachers unions.
Yeah.
Do you support them?
Certainly, I'm a member of mine.
Wonderful. You can continue. That's all I needed to check. Needed
Absolutely,
to see
I
if I needed to hang up on you or not. That's all.
right, yeah, yeah. No, damn right I do. Um, but I've never seen a school board member in a public school. That's a problem. Uh, when I'm the mayor of Omaha, kids are going to see the mayor in their school, whether it's reading to them in an elementary or speaking to their civics class in the high school, and not for some weird self-serving purpose, but to get them involved. I said in a meeting earlier tonight with other candidates, I went, look, everybody, it was a Democrat meeting. I said, look, like, we're all glad that the election turned out the way it did. I'm a little calmer now that the Great Orange Menace is no longer the president of the United States. But at the end of the day, who is the president affects our day-to-day lives substantially less than who is running your municipality. And so we have to help young people understand, yes, you should vote for president, damn it. Of course you should, but don't stop there. You need to be invested in who's your mayor, who's on your city council, who's running your libraries, for God's sake. This stuff matters. And on that note, I'd like to say that part of one of the first policy I released actually um, is to move. So we have my election, my primary is on April the 6th. 35 days later, on May the 11th, is the general. This is, what's the word? Stupid. And the reason it's stupid is because we hold two separate municipal elections. Every time we hold elections, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars that we don't need to spend basically for the purpose of suppressing voter turnout. And so if we stop holding these elections, my policy will sync our municipal elections with the presidential elections, and we will skyrocket voter turnout. More people will be involved in the way that the city is run, and we'll also save a boatload of money in the process. So it's good for everybody except me. I'll lose 6 months off my first term, but I can deal with that.
Would you support the voting age in city elections being lowered to 16?
Absolutely. And I wanted to make sure there was no hesitation in my voice. Now, I don't have any plan to try to make that happen. I don't even think as a municipal leader that I can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it comes back to the matter I was speaking to a moment ago of respect. I respect young people and their opinions. Being 16 doesn't mean you don't know anything, and being 35 doesn't make you a genius either. So, ultimately, yeah, absolutely. I think that young people should have more of a say in what's happening in their world.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to, of course, the thing that's on everybody's mind, probably in the city and probably across the whole country, the COVID. So COVID has had a huge impact on small businesses across the state, across the country, and of course across your city as well. Many have gone under due to the ability that they just can't cope with this sudden, immediate change. What are you going to do to make sure that those businesses that are under a ton of pressure right now have the support from you as the mayor?
Sure. Our Omaha's response to COVID has been disastrous. We were the last major city in the country to implement a mask mandate. That's embarrassing.
So you do support a mask mandate?
Absolutely, I do.
Okay.
And I support a mask mandate until we know that everybody has had the option to be vaccinated. Just because you've been vaccinated doesn't mean you get to stop wearing the darn thing, because, ultimately you can still spread this. And so it's going to be a while. And I think public information has to be put into work to make sure that, people understand, hey, this is going to be a transition for us, but we're going to get there. And that's where our leadership has really faltered in this city. And in many others. So, being the last city to implement a mask mandate, we put our restaurants in particular. We have a vibrant restaurant scene, but all of our small businesses and all of our residents in a really precarious situation. And many of them did not survive. One of my plans is to try to implement a program that will allow people to restore businesses that were lost to the pandemic and get some municipal support in the process. We may secure loans or help with down payments. And it probably won't be limited to businesses that were lost in the pandemic, because we have a lot of nasty food deserts in this city where, you can't find fresh produce for miles. And I think this would be a good use of that program as well, is making sure that there are grocery stores and things of that nature. So I think that there's a lot that we can do to fight for small businesses, and we haven't even begun. As I frequently speak to small business owners. My parents, not in this city, but my parents own a small bookstore in another town, and I don't think that they've been offered really any meaningful relief, and that's a shame. Why have a city government if it doesn't help the people of the city?
Okay. A lot of people are obviously laid off because they work could just not afford to keep them, or it was not possible for them to work safely. Some people are now having to change employment very quickly, and there's a lot of people who are under a lot of economic pressure. Obviously, a lot of this assistance that could be offered to them would be offered by the federal government, the state government, and sometimes the county government. But what can you, as mayor, do for specifically the people who are currently struggling to pay rent, utilities, or other things within your city?
Sure. And I think that there are a number of different approaches that we can take, and we'll probably attempt to take pretty much damn near all of them. One of the things that we have to do is stop evictions right now. It was 23 degrees below zero in Omaha yesterday. That's not accounting for wind chill. Being homeless in weather like that will kill you. And and it doesn't even have to be anywhere near that cold, right? So there's a lot that we need to do for our unhoused populations, and to stop, for God's sake, creating more of them by allowing people to be evicted in times like this. You mentioned that a lot of the sources of
When you
funding.
when you say not allow it, what do you mean? Are you talking like a moratorium on eviction? What exactly are you speaking about?
Yes, a moratorium on evictions,
Okay.
and I think, as I say that, just to clarify, I think we do have to be cognizant of the fact that if I put a moratorium on evictions, I have to then find a way to serve the person who owns the property, right? If my wife and I don't own a rental property, but let's pretend like we did, and we put our life savings into an eightplex, and we're renting it out, and now nobody in it can pay rent, but the bank still expects money from us. We got to get some stuff sorted out. So it's not going to, I don't think it's a one step process by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll circle back to why have a government if it doesn't help the people? And I think one of the things that I look forward to as mayor is having that bully pulpit and the ability to get out in front of people and communicate and say, this is happening, this is wrong, and here's who you need to talk to make it change. Here's where you need to not shop to make that change. Here's where you need to not bank, and close your accounts if these people are going to act this way, because ultimately we have to come together right now. And I won't be at all afraid to do that. I've never been an elected official before. I'm not real concerned about what you're supposed to do. I'm concerned about what's the right thing to do,
Mhm.
and I'll try always to do that for the people of the city.
Question: You brought up unhoused peoples. I'm someone who lives near DC, so I know a little bit about what it's like to have a lot of people on the streets who are unable to acquire housing. My mother was actually one of those people, up until the point where she passed, and it had a huge impact on her life. And one thing that really tears at my heartstrings is anti-homeless architecture specifically designed to scare homeless people from just trying to find a flat surface to sleep on when they can't find housing. Are you aware of any anti-homeless architecture within your city? And if it is there, what would you do to remove it?
Yeah, disappointingly, I'm acutely aware of it. We just put in a really great new bus system called Orbit, Omaha Rapid Bus Transit. Now, right now, Orbit is incomplete. It pings back and forth on our major thoroughfare. I want to see it run north to south to connect those communities and also to the airport, and we can talk more about that. But the bus stops at Orbit, I've ridden and I've noticed the bus stops are designed with benches that you cannot sleep on. In fact, there's very little space in the stop itself, and it's basically like a bus stop is a bit of a shelter, right? It's at least a shelter from wind and rain when it's built well, but it's designed to not allow people to sleep there. We need to, number one, not build them that way. But number two, I think as we think about our unhoused populations, um, a couple of things come immediately to mind. One, our city currently has a ban on panhandling. And as I've always said, that is telling the people who need the most help that they are the exact people who are not allowed to ask for it. And that is reprehensible, in my opinion. And that's something that I will repeal as quickly as I possibly can. Beyond that, we have homeless shelters. Part of my LGBTQ plus Bill of Rights is to say, number one, that the homeless shelters, because we know that our trans populations and other populations are disproportionately unhoused, and that's, I mean, that's a real problem. But it's a problem with the solution. And one of the things that we can do is to say, look, these shelters need more assistance. These food banks need more assistance, and the municipality is going to chip in as long as you're not discriminating. And then they'll have a choice to make. And I think you can trust people to make the right choice, especially if you're tugging at their purse strings while you suggest it.
Okay, there was recently a something that came across my city council, and I went there to speak for it in favor of it, which was signing on to a law, a legal case about a gay couple who were trying to get adoption services from a taxpayer-funded adoption center. But they were denied, and now the case is going across all the district courts and all the courts. And if a case like that came to the city of Omaha to sign on in favor of the couple, would you vote in favor or try to get it through so you would sign on in favor of that couple?
100 times out of 100. Absolutely, yes. And I forgive the platitude, but love is love. Some of the best parents that I have ever met are gay couples. And I, yes, I don't know how to be more emphatic. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, that was a quick and easy answer. Back to the issue of homelessness. I wanted to branch out a little bit and talk specifically about drug abuse. So drug abuse has of course spiked since across the country since the start of the drug war. Different drugs have come around, whether it be opioids, heroin, and you pick your drug of choice. And assistance to these people have been dwindling, if not almost non-existent. What would you do to specifically help people in your community that need help but are many times locked away for clinging to somebody to help them with other issues, whether it be mental health or depression?
Certainly. So yeah, thank you. What an extraordinary question. One part of my platform early on was that we need to do everything we can to destigmatize mental illness. I make it a point in my classes to always try to work as naturally as possible into a class conversation. The fact that I genuinely don't believe I'd still be married if it were not for marriage counseling. Mm-hmm. And I've also, employed the services of a therapist personally. There is nothing to be ashamed of about that. Folks need some help sometimes, right? And if you break your arm, I know what to do, right? I know who can help you. I know where to find them, and I can get you there. And you're not going to resist that, right? But if what's broken isn't sticking out of your flesh and bleeding, then suddenly we treat it differently. As a society, again, we've stigmatized it. And I think we can do a lot with public information. We can do a lot with, I can do a lot with the bully pulpit. I'm going to make sure the people of Omaha know, hey, get some marriage counseling if that's what you need, But I think beyond that, we can pay for it. And I believe that we're going to be presented with a unique and important opportunity in 2020 in Nebraska. If you want to talk about activist judges, you could talk about the Nebraska Supreme Court. They unilaterally decided that despite six digits worth of signatures on a petition to legalize medical marijuana, the Supreme Court decided that wasn't going to be on the ballot. We've got our activist judges right here at home. But in 2022, we will have that on the ballot. As mayor, I will fight hard to make sure that we get that on the ballot. I believe that the people of Nebraska will legalize medical and possibly recreational marijuana, at which point, and I say this lightly, we can tax the hell out of it, right? I think that hundreds of thousands, probably millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of marijuana is probably sold in Omaha on an annual basis. We get $0 in tax money because we're not smart enough to legalize it and tax it. We'll change that in 2022, and some of what we can do with the immense additional revenue will be to offer real drug counseling, real rehabilitation for people, whether they can afford it out of pocket or not.
What do you think of a clean needle exchange program?
I don't find that problematic at all. I have no
Would you
policy.
support it though if it
Cer-
was on your desk?
Certainly, yeah, yeah. If it were legislation that, let's say the city council passed it, there's no way in hell I veto that. No. And I might even, I'd want to learn more, but I may even push to have it go through. It's not something that I've done a tremendous amount of research into, but from my basic understanding of it, this is just good for people. I mean, it's not necessarily good to need the needle, but that's a separate issue.
Okay. What is your biggest public safety concerns when it comes to Omaha?
Currently, it's a pandemic. Um, I think that again, we've just managed it very poorly, despite having a lot of resources that could have helped us do a good job. I think that another one that our city faces that's going to approach us far too rapidly is climate change. And I don't really hear anybody putting forth meaningful policy on how they're going to address it. And that was an important thing to us from the very beginning, right? Again, we kind of fall back on cliches, but there's no other planet for us to go inhabit. So we've got to take care of this. And right now, I think it's worth noting that Omaha, unlike many of our neighbors, does not have anything in place to do that. Our neighboring city, Lincoln, has a pretty progressive climate action plan in place. When our city council banned plastic bags, our mayor vetoed the ban and cut recycling from once a week to once every other week, and I could go on.
Mhm.
So we Omaha is
You would reverse those types of you would of course reverse those types of policies. What besides reversing the damage the current incumbent has done, what would you do to go further than that to build on those reversals?
oh certainly yeah. So one of we don't compost as a city, but we could. We don't recycle glass, but we could. Um, I mentioned earlier, I want to see, we currently have a fleet of about 150 diesel buses. I'd like to see that fleet expanded to 300 because I think we need better public transportation, which, by the way, is very good for the climate. If you can replace 50 cars with one bus, you've really accomplished something. If you can make that one electric bus, even better. And so, one of the things I want to see us doing is transitioning to electric buses, um, planting more trees, creating more green space, encouraging people to do more walking, more biking, taking advantage. We do a lot with solar here as much as we can. We're not in a great place for solar. We're in a better place for wind power. I think we can take more advantage of wind power. And I've even got some pretty huge ideas. GM has announced that they're going to move their entire fleet to electric by 35. Right. Well, they got to build those somewhere. I'd love, upon being elected mayor, to go to GM and go, all right, I want you to build the Chevy Volt or name it. I don't really care what it is in Omaha. And we won't tax the people of Omaha when they buy one. And we'll put chargers all over the city. And we will do everything we can to incentivize everybody in this city to drive an electric vehicle.
I got a question about that. A lot of
Cool.
times when this happens, when it happened with like Amazon or any factory trying to get into your city, there's what as many people call it to a race to the bottom, where you start basically saying, well, we'll cut your taxes here, we'll do this for you here, and then a lot of the profits you would expect to see from businesses coming, you don't then see that in city revenue. What would you do to make sure you incentivize them to come and you get them in Omaha, but you don't do a race to the bottom that means you don't see the benefits?
Certainly, yeah, yeah. So I think you've got to get really creative with what you're doing, right? One of the problems that Omaha has that's not unique to Omaha is urban sprawl and being surrounded by suburbs. And I mean, that's pretty natural, right? That's true of most major metropolitan areas. But, a lot of people, in Omaha don't buy the house in Omaha. They buy the house in Papillion. They buy the house in Bellevue. And there's nothing wrong with those cities except that we can't tax those municipalities. And so when you own your house there, your tax money doesn't pay for our firefighters. It doesn't pave our streets. It doesn't fund our schools. And so I
Sorry
think
if you
you,
can't see me, my camera just malfunctioned. You can continue.
all right, cool. I was like, do I talk to the dot? Like, pretty cool logo, by the way.
It's
Uh,
Snapchat.
oh, okay. um, but like, there's a lot that we can do, I think, in incentivization, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe, if Chevy says we'll build the Volt in Omaha, I expect to have to give them pretty hefty tax breaks. But I think we can build into that how many Omaha residents they're going to employ and how much money they're going to put into paving the roads that these cars are going to drive on and things like that, so that ultimately we are improving the lives of our citizens. I frankly, I need to not give my opponents a soundbite, but what I will say is that how much tax the company pays matters less than how much good the company does for the people of the city. So if Chevy moves into our city and paves our streets so that we don't have any potholes and employs 5,000 of our people who all go out to eat and all buy houses and all buy cars in this city, I don't much care if they're paying taxes or not.
I got two questions then. Is there a red line for you when it comes to that race to the bottom, which you're not willing to pass, that you could declare? And two, would you make sure and pledge to make sure that these are union jobs, that these people are represented by a union?
So yes and yes. And to the first question, I think it becomes a cost benefit analysis. I can't give you a number. It's going to be, is this good for the city of Omaha, or is it just a thing, right? We don't just need a thing. We don't just need a factory. But if ultimately we sit down and go, no, the long-term contract says this employs a lot of people and so on, and this is good for our city, that's the answer, right? If it's good for the city, I'm going to do it 100 times out of 100. And then, secondly, absolutely, we'll support union jobs.
So if they say that these will not be union jobs and they fight against it being union jobs, would you reject that? Trying to incentivize them at that point, saying we want union jobs in this city and we will not undercut our workers?
Absolutely. And I'm not going to say that they necessarily like that we'd tell a company you have to employ 100% union. I don't know if there's a company out there that does that. But I'd want to know, and I'd want to look into it, right? I met the other day a gentleman who's the head of a union, and I wish I could remember the name, but they represent custodial staff in our city and maintenance crews. And those people need a seat at that table too, right? If you're going to open a factory here, you're going to have custodial staff. I want to see those be union jobs as well. And so, yeah, we'll fight for it. I'm not going to say that a company can't, build here if they're not 100% union jobs. But it's certainly something we'll incentivize.
There is a problem in Omaha about the differences in quality in education between school districts. This is a problem throughout all of Nebraska, though. The idea that certain schools are getting much higher quality education than other schools, and the results you're seeing from testing scores are not the same. What are you going to do to close that gap and make Omaha a leader in education in the state and maybe in the country?
The first thing I'm going to say is that I just don't put much stock in test scores. In fact, as a teacher, I put almost no stock in test scores. I did some postdoc work at Harvard University, and I was in a room with about 35 other teachers, arguably pretty bright people. And we were studying the work of Johann Galtung and his frameworks for peace and violence. And when asked for an example of structural violence, a teacher next to me shot her hand up in the air and she said, standardized testing. And we all kind of chuckled for about a second. And then we all went, oh, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's the textbook example of structural violence. Standardized tests have been used to keep certain populations of people, quote unquote, in their place for a century now, and it needs to stop. Now, that's not part of my policy running for mayor, but it's
personal.
Certainly something. Yes, absolutely. And it's something I will advocate for. Having said that, it's not to deflect the question that there could very well be varying qualities of education within our city, and that we need to do more for all of our students. And one of the things that we can do, again, comes back to the bully pulpit. Nebraska ranks 48th out of 50 in state funds to public schools.
I was about to ask you about funding distribution.
Yeah. So, I mean, as mayor of Omaha, I'm mayor of about 26% of the state of Nebraska. You better believe I'm going to beat the governor up over that until we get more funding. And he's actually seeking right now to cap it even further. I'm opposed to that cap. I'm opposed to charter schools. I'm opposed to voucher programs that are going to defund public education. There's a lot that we can fight and that is on my agenda to fighting for public schools, fighting for teachers, students, and the families we serve is actually a high priority of mine, even if it doesn't fall within the traditional purviews of the job.
So, quick question. When you say you're going to fight the governor on this, how exactly would you fight him? Do you mean like a strongly worded letter, or do you think you have leverage in certain areas to make him listen to your demands?
Well, I suppose I appreciate you letting me clarify. I am not threatening Governor Ricketts with physical violence, but I think I can do a little bit better.
After January 6th, we always need to be careful about the word fight a little bit.
No kidding. No, yeah, well said. Well said. Thank you. One of the things this state's got 1.9 million people in it. It's just not that big. And given a microphone, I can do an awful lot of damage to the governor and his aspirations. And I think he's going to be compelled to work with us. And ultimately, I don't. You want to believe that there's some good in everybody. You want to believe that everybody can maybe be helped to see the error of their ways. And so I guess I'd begin simply by trying to educate him a little bit. He's actually a graduate of a public high school in Omaha, Nebraska. And I don't think they advertise that fact. I know I wouldn't. But I think that ultimately he can he can be helped to see, and also he's on his way out. And so we can work really hard to make sure that the person who replaces him is far more progressive and pro-education. Whether they're a Democrat or Republican, they need to be pro-education, and that's something I'll work hard on.
So you'd use the power of the bully pulpit to bring attention to the fact that he would be undercutting Omaha's quality of education.
Omaha's and the state of Nebraska's, the entire states. And then I think also, right, there are 5 or 6 names currently being floated on who's going to run for governor. And I think vetting those candidates for their stances on education and fighting like hell to get pro-education candidates into the governor's mansion is important as well.
Here's a question. How would somebody, let's say you win, how would somebody win your endorsement for any public office? What would be the qualities you would look for in somebody you would endorse?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a tremendous irony in that. I knew when I declared my candidacy for this race that I was running against an incumbent who was a woman and who was likely to pursue a third term. Despite that fact, I have long been a passionate advocate for women holding public office. Some of that stems from my work in Rwanda. Rwanda's democratically elected parliament is 64% female. And that's not actually a product of the genocide, but that's a side note. So I've always thought, meanwhile, right, like in a good year, our parliament, if you want to call it that, is 20%. So I think that more women need to hold office. I think that more people of color need to hold office, despite the fact, again, that I'm running against numerous people of color, 2 of whom are women. I would like to see more diversity in our office holders, but to win my endorsement, ultimately it's going to take progressive ideals and a vision. That's where I think I stand out as a candidate. I think that you have to have a vision for the future as it can be, and not a pie in the sky, oh, wouldn't it be nice kind of a song, but a reality, a well-researched policy, and a willingness and an ability to implement it. And I will support any candidate who I believe can do that.
Okay. Now I do gotta ask, because you said you saw the irony in it, and I think everybody would. If you want to see more people of color and more women in office, why not support a person of color, a woman currently running for office? Why run your own campaign?
Sure. And I want to begin with a little story, because I was in a mayoral forum earlier tonight, and apparently my mic was not working well. And it was I guess you would think of her as an opponent of mine. We're running for the same office. Messaged me on Facebook Messenger and said, your mic's not working well. And shortly after that, I screenshotted that. I got her permission and I tweeted it out just to make sure I gave her props, right? Like, we may be running for the same office, but we're also on the same team. What I tell people about my pursuit of this office and why I have not stepped down to allow a person of color, perhaps a woman of color, to pursue it without me in their way, is that I think it boils down to vision. And I believe so strongly in my vision for the future of our city, in fighting to prevent brain drain, in making college tuition free for every high school graduate in our city, in improving public transportation and walkability and bikeability, in my aggressive plans to fight climate change and to bolster our business community. I have given tremendous thought to what I want to do and how I'm going to do it as mayor. And while I have the utmost respect for my opponents, I do not hear my vision reflected in their platforms.
Fair enough. I got two more questions and I'll let you go. I don't want to keep you all night. So the first question is, hearing that, how do you expect to make it so every child who graduates in the city of Omaha can go to college tuition free?
Certainly. And, again, I want to emphasize, when my campaign rolls out policy, these are promises that the people of Omaha can take to the bank. These are not, oh, well, that'd be a nice thing for us, right? Yeah, it'd be nice to launch space shuttles out of Omaha. It's also not something we can do. It'd be, and so this is something we can do. And it begins with existing programs. The Nebraska, I think it's called the Nebraska Promise, which is for low income communities, a number of scholarships from our local institutions, and then the already immense contributions of our philanthropic community, which puts hundreds of kids through college annually. We're going to create a place where we can synthesize those opportunities with employers like Hy-Vee, Walmart, Burger King, and others who offer scholarships. And then we're going to make up the difference, right? So the first thing we're going to do is create a place, and I'm going to have a cabinet level post where someone who reports to me on a near daily basis is working exclusively on this project. And we're going to create a system in which you can make sure that you're getting every dime you're eligible for. That won't unto itself put everybody through college. But that's where being the mayor of a municipality of 500,000 people becomes a real perk, because the buying power is immense. And we have a local institution that I won't name that I learned recently is selling off land to pay bills. I think that we can approach that institution and others like it with very agreeable offers, where, and everybody wants something, right? So maybe what they want is bus stops and better roads at their institution. They'll tell me what they want. What I want is to buy tuition from them for 3 cents on the dollar, and I'm willing to buy 5 million credit hours at a time, as long as they don't expire. So the institution gets a much needed cash infusion, but also earns the goodwill of the people of the city and helps end brain drain and keep young people in our city and get them educated.
That
So
that was something I needed to ask you. Now I say I had a last question, but now every question devolves into more questions. That was something I actually got messages when I said I was going to interview you from locals who were concerned about this specific issue, brain drain. The idea that they don't want Omaha to become a hollowed out city where the people they raised here end up leaving here for California or Texas or some other state when they could be contributing to your city. How do you expect? We've already given one instance, but what are some other things? What are you going to give hope to these people that they have a future in the city?
Yeah, so I actually did another, what I think is a really good podcast on brain drain, and I hope people will check that one out too. But I interviewed a lot of really our best and brightest who were in New Orleans, who were in San Francisco, who were in DC, and said, what are you doing there, and what'll it take to get you back? I think that there's a lot that we can do in this city, but some of the most popular things, some of the most common things that I hear are lack of opportunity, right? We like to talk about the Silicon Prairie, but we have not created the Silicon Prairie. The jobs that, we could, but we need to have more and better jobs available here. And that's something that I know I can make happen. And I have a plan for that too, but that would be another devolution, more questions. But another thing, one thing I hear a lot, a young lady who was a former student of mine said one time, I thought quite poignantly, she said, I'm not coming back. I want to live in a city where I don't have to own a car. we can make this into that city. We can make this a much more attractive place for young people either to stay
Mhm.
in or to return to. I don't want to tell a kid that gets into Yale they can't go to Yale. I want them to go to Yale, get a world-class education, and then come back and put it to use in their hometown. And I know that we can make this happen.
I wanna say something to chat, and all the data I've looked at, as somebody who is extremely positive on the idea of public transport, is that younger people are buying cars less and less. They see it as a not worthwhile investment. They don't want to make car payments, and they're relying more and more on public transportation. And so when people try to like sell young people on, hey, let's do like a hip hop dance or something to get them involved in politics. If you want to get young people involved in politics, talk to them about issues about like public transportation, things that they had to take to school, things they got to take to other places. That is a big issue to young people, and it's not discussed as a youth issue when it is a youth issue because they disproportionately use public transportation. Just want to make that clear to the chat.
Yeah.
I promised my two last questions. I'm sorry. It's just I just have a million things. I'm sorry. Two last questions. You've talked about a lot of policies today, and you're in the middle of a pandemic, and people's pinching pennies, to say the least. A tax hike in the middle of a pandemic to pay for any of these policies would be pretty scary to anybody, to any working class person in Omaha. How exactly are you going to pay for all of these proposals?
Certainly.
Now, you don't need to go through all of it, but just in general, because obviously all of it, that we covered a lot. But how are you going to pay for these proposals while not breaking the back of working class people in Omaha?
And I think you make a really good point. I'm not going to promise, I'm a Democrat. I'm not going to promise not to raise taxes. We have a social agenda that costs money. We want to take care of people, and taking care of people costs money. But I think that we can be far more creative with where we get the money and far better stewards of the money that we have. So, one of the things that I think we absolutely must see is the fat cut from the city's budget. And day one, I'll pull the cabinet together and all the heads of departments, and I'm going to say, you're going to cut the fat. And if they tell me they can't find fat, they will become that fat, and they will be replaced with somebody who can find it. The bottom line is, I'll give you a silly example that's not really that silly. I can drive my own car. The mayor currently has a chauffeur. This is wasted taxpayer money. And it's frankly just inappropriate, and there may have to be on a citywide level pay freezes. I think we can also get really creative in other ways. I mean, you look at we have a real problem with our fire rigs right now. Many of our fire rigs don't have working ladders. I don't know the number, but I hear that repeatedly. You can lease vehicles like that and create a far more workable budget than trying to repair 30-year-old equipment year after year after year. So I think part of it is more responsible spending. I'll give you one more example. I don't have inherently a problem with tax increment financing. I have a real problem with the corrupt way in which it's being applied in the city I live in. There is an $80 million gift going to rich developers at 72nd and Dodge, which for anybody who's not familiar is prime real estate in this city. And tax increment financing is designed to improve damaged areas, right? And so that is, by the way, more than twice as big as any TIF previously. That shouldn't be happening. And that's our money, and it needs to be stewarded better. I already mentioned that you can tax marijuana, and I think we anticipate being able to do that. There's quite a bit that can be done to manage our money better without raising taxes in a pandemic.
Okay. Last question. And this is, again, one of those tough ones that I hope doesn't get clipped, but might. So, be careful here.
All right. Thanks for the warning.
If you were elected mayor, would you make Omaha a sanctuary city, and would you stop cooperation with ICE?
Absolutely. That one's not tough for me. I've spent my life devoted to working in human rights. And as is frequently said, and I think very meaningly so, no human being is illegal. This country was founded both on noble principles and the blood of slaves, right? Nothing is simple. Nothing is black and white, or very few things at least. And I think defending our fellow human beings is one of the things that falls into the category of no, that's just right. And so, I know I have no interest in working with ICE at all. I have every intention of defending human beings, especially those with the greatest need, and that would include many of my students. And I'll go ahead and go on record and say I would encourage anybody running against me to clip that and use it away, because it's not a story I'm about to change.
I'm happy to hear that. And after hearing that, I've read your what you've declared as your policies. I've wanted to ask you that question, and I wanted to ask you the questions about helping people in the city. And I can say for sure that I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you win.
Dylan, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you having me on here. May I make an appeal to your listeners?
Of course.
How many listeners do you have right now?
231, and after we post it on YouTube, that'll be probably like a couple thousand more.
Fantastic. That's great, and I'm honored to have had the chance to speak to you and to speak with them. I've frequently stolen lines from Lin-Manuel Miranda in describing our campaign, in that this is not a moment, it's a movement. I was asked in a mayoral forum tonight and it was a question of all candidates, not of me, but they said, how are you going to raise enough money to win? I said, if you think you're going to outspend the Ricketts political machine in Nebraska, you're delusional. Whoever wins our primary is going to go up against somebody who can outspend them 2, maybe 3 to 1. But it's about the beliefs, it's about the ideas, it's about the vision for the future of the city. And I would ask your listeners if they appreciate what they heard, if they think that I'd be a good mayor of Omaha, as I believe I will be, I'd ask them to support us. Fundraising is the single most difficult part of this gig. I did the math just this morning, I think, just to haunt myself. And I found, and I thought it was amazing, my average donation over the last 5 days was $17. And on an average donation of $17, we're funding a movement, and we're going to put a teacher in City Hall. And I couldn't be more honored to be the leader of that movement. But if your listeners are willing and interested, I would be honored to have their support. If the number of people you just said are listening gave us our average donation, man, we could do a lot with that. That would be incredible. So if you don't mind, I'll put some information in the chat. Does that work?
I believe Sejin actually already put it in the chat. And I would like to say to everybody, I'm going to be donating. I hope you all donate. And if you were going to donate to today's show to help with production, I can go off one day without a donation. Give it to this guy instead. I'm always happy to help small grassroots progressive candidates get into office. As a financial director of a campaign, and as somebody who managed a mayoral campaign, finance is the complicated and probably the most boring part of the job, because you'd rather be talking to the voters, you'd rather be talking about issues, and instead you're looking at sheets and trying to make the numbers work. So please help him out, make his job less boring, and make it more exciting so he can go argue with the governor.
Dylan, I am grateful to you. Thank you so much. And if you ever want to talk again, I'd love to come back on.
I would love to have you on anytime. Oh, wait, one last question. This one from chat. You watch anime?
Not as much as my students wish I did. Had a real thing for
I need to rephrase some of the earlier statements I made about this candidate. I made a lapse in judgment about this man. Hey, I'm happy that you came on, and I really do wish you luck.
Thank you, Dylan. I truly appreciate it. Have a great night. I hope to see you again soon.
Hope to see you again. See you.